Yesterday was December 31st. I finished breakfast with my friend Georges Guérin. Then, a servant gave him a letter with seals and stamps from other countries. Georges said, "Can you excuse me?" I replied, "Of course." He read the letter, which had big English writing and lines going all over. Georges read it slowly, paying serious attention and showing interest in things that touch the heart. After reading, he put the letter on the mantelpiece and said, "That was a strange story. I haven't told you about it, I think. But it was a romantic adventure that happened to me. It was a peculiar New Year's Day, about 20 years ago when I was 30. Now, I'm 50. I worked for the maritime insurance company back then. I planned to spend New Year's Day in Paris, but the manager sent me a letter asking me to go to the island of Ré. A ship from Saint Nazaire, insured by us, had just been stranded. It was 8 a.m. I got to the office at 10, got my instructions, and that evening, I took a train to La Rochelle, arriving on December 31st. I had 2 hours before boarding the boat to Ré. So, I explored the town. La Rochelle is a strange city, with streets like a maze, sidewalks under covered galleries, and a mysterious vibe. After I walked around the interesting streets, I got on a small black boat called the Jean Guiton. It was going to take me to the island of Ré. The boat started with loud sounds. It was one of those sad days that make you feel down. The weather was gray and cold, with a mist that felt as wet as rain, as cold as frost. It was a sea of muddy water, greasy water, and still water. The Jean Guiton sailed over it, rocking a bit. I started talking to the captain. I wanted some details about the accident for my report. A big 3-masted ship, the Marie Joseph from Saint Nazaire, had run aground one night in a strong storm on the sands of the island of Ré. The owner wrote to us that the storm had pushed the ship so far onto the shore that it was impossible to float her. They had to quickly remove everything that could be taken off. Still, I had to check the wreck, estimate what her condition was before the accident, and decide if all efforts were made to float her. I came as a representative of the company to give information, if needed, at the trial. The captain of the Jean Guiton knew all about it because he was called with his boat to help in the salvage attempts. He told me the story of the disaster. The Marie Joseph, pushed by a strong storm, lost her direction completely in the night. While he talked, I looked around. Between the ocean and the dark sky, there was an open space where you could see far away. We were following a coast. I asked, "Is that the island of Ré?" "Yes, sir." And suddenly the captain pointed with his right hand to something small in the open sea and said, "There's your ship. The Marie Joseph." Yes. I was surprised. This small, almost invisible dot, which looked like a rock to me, seemed at least 3 miles away from land. I asked, "But, Captain, there must be a lot of water in that place." He started to laugh. "A lot of water, my child. Well, I would say about 2 fathoms. I thanked the captain and went to sit in the front of the boat to look at the small city of Saint Martin, which we were quickly getting closer to. It was just like all small ports that serve as capitals of the barren islands along the coast. However, I didn't go far into the middle of the island. After breakfast, I climbed over a small point of land. As the tide was quickly going down, I started walking across the sands toward a kind of black rock I could see above the water, a good distance away. I walked fast over the yellow plain. I looked at the stranded wreck, which got bigger as I got closer, and now looked like an enormous shipwrecked whale. I climbed onto this dead ship from the lower side, then, having reached the top, I went inside. The daylight, coming through the broken hatches and cracks in the sides, showed me dim, long dark spaces full of broken wood. They had nothing but sand, which was like the ground in this cave of planks. I started to write some notes about the condition of the ship. Suddenly, very close to me, I heard human voices. I jumped as if I had seen a ghost. For a second, I really thought I was about to see drowned people come up from the dark parts of the ship, who would tell me about their death. Anyway, it didn't take me long to get back on deck. There, by the front, was a tall Englishman with 3 young girls. They were definitely more scared of seeing me suddenly on the deserted 3-master than I was of seeing them. The youngest girl ran away, and the other 2 hugged their father. As for him, he opened his mouth. That was the only sign of emotion he showed. Then, after a few seconds, he spoke. "Mister, are you the owner of the ship?" "I am." "May I go over it?" "You may." Then he said a long sentence in English, where I only understood the word gracious, repeated several times. As he was looking for a place to climb up, I showed him the easiest way and gave him a hand. He climbed up, and then we helped up the 3 girls, who had now calmed down. They were charming, especially the oldest, an 18-year-old blonde, fresh as a flower, very dainty and pretty. She spoke French a little better than her father and acted as an interpreter. I had to tell them all about the shipwreck, and I made it sound like I had been there when it happened. Then the whole family went into the inside of the wreck. As soon as they entered this dark, dimly lit space, they exclaimed with surprise and admiration. Suddenly, the father and his 3 daughters had sketchbooks in their hands, which they had probably hidden somewhere in their heavy weatherproof clothes, and they all started making pencil sketches of the sad and strange place. I continued to look at the skeleton of the ship, and the oldest girl talked to me while she worked. They didn't have the usual English arrogance. They were simple, honest hearts of that class of continuous travelers with which England covers the globe. All 3 girls were pretty, especially the tallest. She had a funny way of speaking, laughing, understanding and not understanding, raising her eyes to ask a question, eyes blue as the deep ocean, stopping her drawing for a moment to guess at what you meant, going back to work, saying yes or no. I could have listened and looked forever. Suddenly she murmured, "I hear a little sound on this boat." I listened, and I immediately heard a low, steady, curious sound. I stood up, looked out of the crack, and screamed. The sea had come up to us. It would soon surround us. We were on deck in an instant. It was too late. The water circled us, running toward the coast at tremendous speed. No, it did not run. It glided, crept, spread like an immense, limitless blot. The water was barely a few centimeters deep, but the rising flood had gone so far that we no longer saw the vanishing line of the imperceptible tide. The Englishman wanted to jump. I held him back. Flight was impossible because of the deep places we had to go around on our way out, and we would fall into them on our return. There was a minute of horrible anguish in our hearts. Then the little English girl began to smile and murmured, "It is we who are shipwrecked." I tried to laugh, but fear held me, a fear that was cowardly, horrid, base, and treacherous like the tide. All the danger we faced hit me at once. I wanted to shout, "Help!" But to whom? The two younger girls were holding onto their father, who stared in shock at the endless sea that surrounded us. The night fell as fast as the ocean rose, a gloomy, wet, icy night. I said, "There's nothing to do but to stay on the ship." The Englishman replied, "Oh, yes." And we waited there for a quarter of an hour, half an hour, I don't know how long, watching the creeping water growing deeper as it swirled around us, as though it were playing on the beach it had regained. One of the young girls was cold, so we went below to shelter ourselves from the light but freezing wind that made our skins tingle. I leaned over the hatchway. The ship was full of water, so we had to cower against the stern planking, which shielded us a little. Darkness was now coming on, and we remained huddled together. I felt the shoulder of the little English girl trembling against mine, her teeth chattering from time to time. But I also felt the gentle warmth of her body through her coat, and that warmth was delightful. We no longer spoke. We sat motionless, mute, cowering down like animals in a ditch when a hurricane is raging. And, nevertheless, despite the night, despite the terrible and increasing danger, I began to feel happy that I was there, glad of the cold and the peril, glad of the long hours of darkness and anguish that I must pass on this plank so near this dainty, pretty little girl. I asked myself, why the strange sensation of well-being and joy? Why? Does one know? Because she was there? Who? She, a little unknown English girl? I did not love her, I did not even know her. And for all that, I was touched and conquered. I wanted to save her, to sacrifice myself for her. Strange thing. How does it happen that the presence of a woman overwhelms us so? Is it the power of her grace that enfolds us? Is it the attraction of her beauty and youth that intoxicates one like wine? Is it not rather the touch of love the mysterious, who seeks constantly to unite two beings, who tries his strength the instant he has put a man and a woman face to face? The silence of the darkness became terrible. Suddenly I heard the sound of sobs. The youngest of the girls was crying. Her father tried to console her, and they began to talk in their own language, which I did not understand. I guessed that he was reassuring her and that she was still afraid. I asked my neighbor, "You are not too cold, are you, miss?" "Oh, yes. I am very cold." I offered to give her my cloak. She refused it. But I had taken it off, and I covered her with it against her will. In the short struggle, her hand touched mine. It made a delicious thrill run through my body. For some minutes, the air had been getting brisker, the splashing of the water stronger against the sides of the ship. I raised myself. A great gust of wind blew in my face. The wind was rising. The Englishman perceived this at the same time that I did and said simply, "This is bad for us, this." Of course, it was bad. It was certain death if any breakers, however feeble, should attack and shake the wreck, which was already so shattered and disconnected that the first big sea would carry it off. The English girl was trembling. I felt her shiver against me, and I had a wild desire to take her in my arms. Down there, before and behind us, to the left and right, lighthouses were shining along the shore. One of them, in particular, irritated me. It went out every 30 seconds and lit up again immediately. It was indeed an eye, that one, with its lid incessantly lowered over its fiery glance. From time to time, the Englishman struck a match to see the hour, then he put his watch back in his pocket. Suddenly he said to me, over the heads of his daughters, with tremendous gravity, "I wish you a happy New Year, sir." It was midnight. I held out my hand, which he pressed. Then he said something in English, and suddenly he and his daughters began to sing "God Save the Queen," which rose through the black and silent air and vanished into space. At first, I felt a desire to laugh, then I was seized by a powerful, strange emotion. When they had finished, I asked my neighbor to sing a ballad alone, anything she liked, to make us forget our terrors. She consented, and immediately her clear young voice rang out into the night. She sang something that was doubtlessly sad because the notes were long drawn out and hovered, like wounded birds, above the waves. I want to tell you about a time when I was on a boat called the Marie Joseph. We got into trouble because the sea started to rise around us. There were 5 of us on the boat, a man and his 3 daughters and me. At first, everything was fine. We explored the wreck of the boat, and the man's daughters even started drawing pictures of it. But then the sea started coming up really fast. We tried to stay on the boat, but it was sinking. It got dark, and the wind started blowing really hard. We were scared because big waves were hitting the boat. The man and his daughters were from England, and at midnight, they sang a song called "God Save the Queen." Later, one of the daughters sang a sad song. The sea was rough, and I couldn't stop thinking about her voice. I even imagined she might be like a siren, a mythical sea creature. Suddenly, the boat tilted, and we all fell. I ended up holding the girl, and in that moment, I wanted the boat to sink, so I could be with her in the sea. But then a rescue boat came, and we were saved. I felt sad because I wanted to spend more time with the girl. We said goodbye, and I never saw them again. The girl wrote me a letter later, saying she got married. Now, every New Year's Day, we exchange letters. She tells me about her life, but never about her husband. And I can't help but remember the Marie Joseph, the boat I loved.